Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is open to more talks with the U.S. and its allies over the escalating tensions with Ukraine.
In his first comments on the Ukraine crisis in 6 weeks, Mr. Putin said today that the Kremlin is still studying the U.S. and NATO's response to Russia's security demands.
He also claimed NATO has ignored Moscow's key security demands.
For more, let's bring in former Texas Congressman Will Hurd. He's also the author of the new book, American Reboot. Congressman Hurd, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. So after moving 100,000 troops to its shared border with Ukraine, Russia argued at the UN yesterday that it's actually the U.S. escalating the situation. As both a former member of Congress and a former CIA operative, what do you think might effectively lower the temperature?
Well, what would lower the temperature if Russia actually left Ukraine? The area that they're in, they already invaded Ukraine back in 2014. So this is not the Russia-Ukraine border. It's actually Ukraine on Ukraine because they're in a part of Ukraine that they already tried to invade and they got pushed back to, in essence, this line of control. So this is all about Vladimir Putin trying to consolidate power and public opinion within Russia. He's afraid of some of the activities that have been going on in other parts of Eastern Europe, and he wants to make sure that public opinion is in his favor. And guess what way to do that? How do you do that? You say that the U.S. is threatening you. You say that NATO is threatening you. And so this is really in Vladimir Putin's court to be able to de-escalate this situation and reduce the tensions that we're seeing.
Congressman, you talk about Russian public opinion. Let's focus on American public opinion. At this moment, with a pandemic, with inflation, with all the things we have to worry about, people may be wondering, how does defending Ukraine fit into our strategic security interests of the moment?
Great question, and that's something that national security practitioners need to do a better job of explaining. One of the most important things for U.S. foreign policy is about the survival of the U.S. and our allies. That includes a country like Ukraine. The reality is the people that are really watching what's happening with Russia and Ukraine is actually China and Taiwan. The reason Vladimir Putin is saber-rattling and intimating that he's going to invade further into Ukraine is because he saw what happened in Afghanistan and that U.S. public opinion was against that. The disastrous withdrawal that the Biden administration did out of Afghanistan. And so the Chinese, we know that they're trying to invade Taiwan. Why does this matter to us? Because if we think inflation is bad now, if we think this chip shortage that is impacting everything from buying phones, cars, and refrigerators, we think it's bad now, just wait until China invades Taiwan and controls 70% of manufacturing of semiconductors in the world. That's going to have a disastrous effect on our economy. That's going to make cost of goods and services be a lot more expensive. And so all of these things are ultimately connected. And ultimately, we have to do a lot of things at the same time. We have to address inflation in the United States. We have to deal with crumbling infrastructure in the U.S. We're going to have to deal with North Korea, and they're launching more missiles than we've ever seen. So we have to be able to do it all at the same time.
I also want to ask about North Korea. It has conducted several ballistic missile tests over the past few months, including one over the weekend. The Biden administration has extended an invitation to talk without preconditions with Pyongyang. In your opinion, is that rewarding bad behavior?
I don't know if that's rewarding bad behavior because we need to have a conversation with them, and we need to make sure Kim Jong-un recognizes that the international community is together. At this point, this is an area where we can cooperate with China. This is, with the Olympics about to start in Beijing, the last thing the Chinese government wants to deal with is a problem on their southern border with North Korea. So I think this is an opportunity where we can eventually work together on this mutual interest when it comes to North Korea. We also have to show the South Koreans and Japan that we have their back and that we're willing to support our allies in this. But we have to, a lot of people are say, hey, this doesn't matter. Is this missile test successful or not successful? Guess what? Every time we tested a missile, and it ended in failure, you learn from those kind of failures, and then you're able to deliver a missile that can potentially hit Guam or some of our other interests. So this is a long-term issue that the only way we're going to resolve is by working with our allies and even working with some adversaries like China on addressing this particular issue.
Congressman, let's talk about a long-term domestic issue. Immigration has resurfaced again as a political hot button. It has done so periodically and regularly for a generation. You represented a border district, a rather large piece of Texas. What do you see happening to address the issue right now?
Look, the border crisis is the worst it's ever been, and it's not getting the kind of coverage and conversation that it deserves. What we saw last month, about half of the people that came illegally actually were, more than just Mexico and the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, which is historically what has driven illegal immigration into our country. I've been talking to ranchers over the last couple of weeks. And border security is a public safety issue for folks that actually live on the border. I have some ranchers that were talking about 60, 70 people in military formation going by their homes. They've never seen this in the decades that they've lived there. And so this is a long-term problem. We have to address root causes in places like the Northern Triangle and Mexico. We have to streamline legal immigration at a time when almost every industry is looking for workers. We should be streamlining legal immigration. We have to address the backlog when it comes to immigration cases. The wait is about 2 years for a lot of these cases. And then ultimately, we have to address asylum laws. Coming to the United States to look for a better job is not a reason for asylum. So all of these things have to be addressed at the same time while we're dealing with a saber-rattling Russia, while we're dealing with a China that's trying to surpass the United States as the sole superpower. So we're living in complicated times, and it's going to require some serious people to address these issues.
Finally, Congressman, when you retired from Congress, you were the only Black Republican in the House of Representatives. Today is the first day of Black History Month. It is also a time that we have learned more than a dozen historically Black colleges and universities received bomb threats against them in the last 24 hours. Against that backdrop, Congressman, I wonder what your thoughts are regarding the scrutiny that we are seeing all across this country in the way in which American schools are teaching issues of race and presenting those issues of race in America's classrooms.
Look, Black History Month is a time for us to look back and understand our history. Black history is American history, and we need to understand our past so we can know where we're going. We know that slavery happened and the impact that it had on a entire population for hundreds of years. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about that and understand that and how that impacted people. My mom is white. My father is Black. They got married in South Texas in 1971. It was only 4 years that it was illegal for an interracial couple to get married. And they live in the house that they live in today because that was the only place that would sell to an interracial couple. These are the kinds of things that have impacted us. And so we need to be mindful of that, understand that, and know where we're going. And there's a lot of take this month as an opportunity to learn about American history, learn about people like Dick Gregory, learn about the civil rights icons that helped us get to the point where I was able to represent a district that when my dad was a traveling salesman couldn't sleep in every hotel. And we got to that point. Now we have a number of Black Republicans in the House, a number of great candidates running. We also have a number of African-American women serving in Congress as well. So we have some ways to go. But this is an opportunity for us to understand that fabric, that quilt that makes America strong is the number of different cultures that are coming together to be what we all call American.
In your book, American Reboot, you wrote about the Republican Party's failure to present a principled vision for the future, which is similar to what you noted in a Washington Post op-ed last year. I'm going to read from it. It says, Republicans aren't going to achieve electoral success by being seen as the party that defends QAnon extremists who advocate the murder of the former vice president, nor will we see success by supporting white supremacists who call a Black police officer the N-word while that police officer puts his life on the line to protect democracy. What more have you seen that makes you encouraged about that party's future?
Well, the reality is the Republican Party is bigger than just the people that you see, fighting with each other on social media or talking on cable news. It's the shop owners. It's the the local officials. And so for me, the opportunity for the Republican Party is to grow in the largest growing groups of voters, young folks, Black and brown communities, and then women with a college degree that live in the suburb. And we need to make sure the GOP looks like America. And when we do that, we're going to be a stronger party. And also that's going to give us an opportunity to win at the ballot box. We've 2022 is an election, especially when it comes to the House, is looking good for Republicans to take back the House and win a number of seats. But it's about more than just one election. I want to make sure that we have a true competition of ideas between both parties so that we can address some of these generational defining challenges that we're faced with. Because the only way we've ever solved big things in this country is by doing it together. And if we have a GOP that looks like America, that's an important cog of making these things happen.
Former Congressman and new author, Will Hurd, thank you for your time.
Thank you.